Okay, 2 photos on each side. So kind of think of this, there's a divide down the middle. You've got 2 photos on this side, 2 photos on this side. This is broadly how, at least I, divided macroeconomics into 2 main thematic areas, as they might say. Okay? Oh, this is lovely. Okay, can someone tell me maybe what's going on the left-hand photos and what's going on in the right-hand photos? Maybe let's start with the left ones. GameStop. I'm glad. I actually asked about GameStop in my class yesterday, or 2 days ago. No one knew what it was. Like, how do you not know about GameStop? Who knows about GameStop in this class? Okay, well, that's a bit more. Like 4.
Me. Well.
It's me. Is that your name, me? Oh no, Wi-Fi's gone. Oh, okay. So what's going on here? What would you maybe call this? So you've got a bit of a financy thing. Does he look happy or sad, this guy? He looks very bald, but he looks what?
Not stonks.
Not stonks.
Yeah.
What's that? I don't know. Is that some Reddit term?
You don't know what stonks mean?
No, I don't spend as much time on Reddit as you probably.
No, it's a thing of Reddit.
Okay. Sorry.
It looks like we have to invest in Bitcoin in 2016.
Well, now if you still have Bitcoin, you're probably doing quite well, thanks to
Actually.
Thanks to who? Thanks to Elon. I'm going to talk about Elon tonight. Anyway, let's feel like we could get talking about for 2. We're going to talk about GameStop later. But okay, he's not happy, but what are these guys? Why are these guys not happy? Can anyone see this word? What's this word? Free, free donuts, but more importantly, unemployed. Okay, so would you say the economy is doing well here or not very well? Not very well. What want we? Yes.
Pictures after recession. Well, I don't know if to speak, but I should let people speak as well. Mainly because
Sorry, I don't think we got all that. Say that again, slowly.
It's the pictures on the left are a recession, and
oh, yeah, perfect, very good. That's the perfect answer. We'll talk about the right in a sec. So we call that exactly a recession. Who was that, by the way? So, Regina? Sorry, Regina George?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, don't mess with Regina. Okay, we got Regina completely right. She said a recession. Okay, so basically, this is the study of why the economy just doesn't keep growing about 2 or 3% a year. Why do we see these ups and downs? Does anyone know what's the opposite of a recession? There's a few words for it. There's not actually a really official word. A boom, exactly. Boom. So we call it boom and bust economics. It goes up and down and up and down. Okay. Also known as the business cycle. Okay. Sometimes these business cycles aren't too bad. Sometimes you have 2008 or 2020, massive recessions, or the worst one of all, maybe. Actually, probably not anymore because of COVID. But what was this? 1929, exactly. Well done. Called the Great Depression, right? Yeah, Great Depression. Okay. So if you're interested in this, good, because mainly what we're going to be studying in this course, almost all actually, is going to be far more on the left side of this screen. Okay. The business cycle, the economy, managing the economy, you'd call it, how to try and avoid this. Okay. How to kind of get your economy to not go up and down too much or at all. Okay. The right-hand side then. So, what is going on in the right-hand side?
Poverty and
exactly.
Income inequality.
Income inequality, very good. So, does anyone have a wild guess? Or this might be, it's actually one of the most famous favelas. Do you call it, so, would you call it favela in Venezuela?
No.
What do you call it in Venezuela? It's a
barrio.
Yeah, it's a barrio. A barrio, yeah, it's a barrio. Does anyone want to guess where this barrio is? Medellin, yeah. Medellin has about 3 million people, over 1 million live in slums, as you'd say in English, live in slums like this, okay? This one's quite famous because it used to be the most dangerous place in the whole world, and now it actually gets quite a lot of tourists. That was my house here. Just joking, I didn't actually live in the barrio. Okay, don't worry, that's why I'm still alive. Okay. What about more interestingly maybe, what about the photo below? Can anyone guess where that is? Everyone always says Dubai, but it's not Dubai. China. Why? Look at the writing on the ship.
Oh.
Okay, it's China. Anyone want to guess which city? Peking? What is this, the 1920s? No one calls it Peking anymore. It hasn't been called Peking for about 70 years. Beijing or Singapore, even. Okay, Singapore this is Singapore. I guess what's interesting about this photo, do you think it would look quite similar if we went back 20 or 30 years? Would there be all these skyscrapers and a really fancy boat?
No.
Almost definitely not. Okay, so this is the other broad area of macroeconomics. Okay, which is basically, does someone guess how would we describe this?
Growth.
Growth. Yeah, very good actually. That's a really good answer. Growth. Okay, so we kind of call this growth economics, growth macroeconomics. Now, I'll be honest right away and say this is what I'm far more interested in. Okay, why do some countries stay poor? Why do some countries are rich? Why do some countries go from being very poor to very rich very quickly? Okay, obviously being from Ireland, quite a good example of that. Was quite a poor country up until about the early 90s. And I was born and everything was fine. Okay, so yeah, you've seen this massive growth in Ireland and other countries. Okay, so we study that as economic development, growth economics, and actually economic history. Okay, understanding the history of why China's gone like this, why Colombia's doing okay, Venezuela obviously was doing very well. We're going to talk about Venezuela a lot, don't worry. Countries like Argentina, and obviously Africa as well. So if you're really interested in that, brilliant. But at the same time, sorry, because we're really not going to talk about this too much. We're going to talk about far much the left-hand side, managing the economy, okay, and a lot less on this. So basically what we're going to do is, what is being argued is quite bad. We're going to take a very westernized approach to macroeconomics, studying countries that we associate with the West. So that's Western Europe, North America, Australia, New Zealand as well. Why their economies are as they are, why they change, why they grow, why they have recessions. We're not really going to talk about why some countries are poor and why some countries are growing, which personally I think is a lot more interesting, but it is also very important. And don't worry, that's not a CEU thing, that's not an Academy thing. Every university, more or less in the world, there's a few, Paris actually, a few, wouldn't teach it like this, but most universities will teach it like this. So you're not really missing out. If you're sat in any first year lecture in the whole world, you'd be kind of seeing the same thing. So don't worry too much, but it is changing slowly. So yeah, so really good. So that's how I divide it up. But I think honestly, there were better answers there. Recessions and growth. You know, why do we have recessions? Why do some countries grow? Why some countries grow so fast? Okay. So speaking of growth, what was the first country in the world to ever experience rapid and I think important sustained economic growth?
USA.
Everyone says USA.
Or really the US.
Yeah, it's usually, you would argue, not argue, it is definitely the UK, as you might say. Okay, not even really the UK, England was the first country in history to actually experience sustained economic growth. Okay, what do I mean by that? Is this is GDP? Everyone comfortable with the term GDP?
Yeah.
Okay, if not, just say because it's quite important. Everyone okay? GDP.
Yeah.
I know it's different in French and Italian. Is it? Yeah, because Spanish call it PIB, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And French? And Italian? Ah, I thought this was a Spanish thing. Okay, so GDP, so basically how much money you have in your economy here, and this is time. Okay, this is the first big thing I want to take away from this class, from this lecture really. The very interesting thing, and some things that even I as an economist didn't really think about for a very long time, and I've been doing economics for quite a long time, I'll talk more about that, is basically growth was basically 0 or maybe 0.2% or something like that for basically a very, very, very long time in England. And then suddenly, around the 1850s, you saw this takeoff. Anyone know what we call this takeoff? The Industrial Revolution, very good. So we know the Industrial Revolution is what caused the growth. But the underlying question is, and this is probably maybe the most studied thing within growth economics, possibly, is why the hell did it happen in England? Why did the hell did it happen in England at that time? And maybe I have a few, I'll put this in the next slide, okay? And why the heck did it spread from England to the USA? And actually the USA actually not just caught up, but spread out. Spread to countries like France, Italy, Spain, to a lesser extent, Ireland, but not to a lot of countries in the world. Okay, so that's really, this is the first part of this class today. We're going to be looking at basically, why did it happen in England? Okay, so here is England on the left, a picture in 1750. This is called Gin Alley, kind of the stereotype of England and Ireland to the same extent probably, of being very, very drunk. Okay, didn't really have a particularly rich economy. It was kind of seen as a bit of a backwater. You know what I mean, a backwater? Maybe you don't know that, like, nothing interesting. Okay, it's kind of a backwater now. Okay, I've used this example before, but I'm always worried because some people, it seems like a really nice place, but you know, Extremadura? Is anyone from Extremadura here? Okay. You know how you describe that as kind of just, there's not much going on economically in Extremadura. No, I'm not saying it very well. Okay, or yeah, some places like that. Okay, as opposed to the Spanish Empire in 1750, which was like about 1/4 of the world, had all your guys' gold flowing back, which was nice, had all these other resources, had, you know, massive military and like just a huge amount of money. At the same time, you know, it wasn't for another 150 years before this country, this empire, these countries down here and here really started to industrialize. So why did it happen in England in the 1850s? Why not Spain? You know, a country that was at the time kind of associated. This is called gin alley, basically gin. Does everyone know that drink? Gin and tonic, obviously. That had been invented about 10 years before this painting, and the whole of England just went on a binge, a drinking binge for about 10 years. Okay, so no one, if you
Monday morning.
yeah, or it's a bit like Benidorm basically. Right? It's kind of like Benidorm, but a whole country, okay? And a serious problem. At the same time, just 100 years after that photo was taken, as I've shown you, okay, the UK was the richest country that had ever existed, by far. Okay, nowhere else came close. And 100 years more than that, obviously, no, maybe I guess the peak would be about relative to the rest of the world, would be sometime around then. You know, so much richer than the rest of the world, and obviously then went on to have the world's biggest empire in history, covering 1/4 of the world. Okay, so the interesting thing I think I really want you to take away from this first part is growth is exceptional. Okay, probably, and I'm going to say this, probably the most amazing thing to ever happen in humanity, and something that's not really talked about, is the fact the Industrial Revolution happened. Why is that? Because, as I say here, you know, if you go back to any time, okay, so we're talking prehistoric, okay, these guys hanging around with dinosaurs. I know there wasn't actually dinosaurs at the same time as people, just in case. Okay, you got the Egyptians, okay, coming all the way up to, you know, medieval serfs and all that, would have basically experienced very, very, very similar lifestyles. And really, up until, you know, there's still lifestyles like this, unfortunately, in the world today, but even up until, you know, mid-1900s, vast majority of the people in the world basically lived very similar lives, which I would describe as short, life expectancy incredibly low, hard, your basic job is to work on a farm all day, bent over, quite boring, okay, not much really going on in terms of technology or innovation, or, you know, your lives being very different, dangerous at the same time in terms of war, okay, or just different intertribal conflicts, or just the chance of being killed was a lot higher. But maybe most importantly of all, and maybe the most interesting thing of all, was there was no change, okay? These people's children's lives would not be very different, if different at all, to these people's grandparents. The exact same for these, the exact same for these. There was really no big change in how your economic life was. For basically, as I would say, you know, 99% of humanity, okay? So that's why I'd say the British Revolution, the British Industrial Revolution, and its subsequent spread outwards, was by far the most important thing to maybe happen in the history of humanity. You might argue the spread of Christianity could be up there, but in my opinion, at least in terms of how it's affected us on a daily life, look at our lifestyles, okay, compared to these guys, okay, it's just massively different, okay? So, you know, that's why I always say, if you were teleported to a year at random, you know, there would be a 99% chance that you'd end up in a society with these kind of characteristics. So don't ever underestimate how lucky you are to kind of live basically in the, you know, in the societies that have existed for the last 50 years in a certain group of countries. Okay? Obviously, there's people who maybe live lives a bit better than that, but still live not brilliant lives, to be honest, compared to what we have. So never underestimate how lucky you are to be born at the right time in the right place, is what I'm trying to say. Okay? We're going to talk more about the unfortunate people who haven't been so lucky. Okay? So yeah, these are the big questions within growth economics, maybe the biggest questions. There's lots of others, okay, talking about different places besides the UK. Okay, maybe, you know, why did it spread out? So why did it happen in England? Why did it happen in 1850? Not 1850 BC. I think you guys, you know what I mean by BC? Like before Jesus. You know, why did it happen? Why didn't it happen in 180? Okay, or 1000 AD? And why then? Why at that time? Why England, not Spain, Mexico, or Japan? Why did it suddenly spread out from England to other countries, like more or less first would be the Netherlands, okay, France, and then to the Americas and to the colonies, places like Australia. Why did some, I know that's a crude word we're going to say a few times in this class, colonies. Why in some colonies did you see phenomenal growth? Australia, New Zealand, North American colonies. Some colonies, Venezuela, Colombia, Argentina, plenty of Haiti, for example, you saw very little growth, okay? And, you know, and maybe the most important question in terms of how people's lives are in the world, why has it still not spread to some countries, okay? That's what I'm going to talk about. So here's a little question, okay? So here we have percentage of the world's GDP, and this axis here. Here we have time again, so from Jesus' first birthday all the way up until 2008. And we have the share, okay? As you can see, there was a big change. There was these places, countries, you might say, okay, used to be the dominant share of the world's GDP. And this massively fell away at the same time that you saw this industrialization of Western Europe and the USA. So, you know, at its peak, maybe around here, Western Europe and the USA had about 60% of the world's GDP, as opposed to if you were going back to here, it would be, you know, about 10%. So you saw this massive reversal of fortune, we might say, where countries that were very big, okay, you know, had a big share, went from having a big share to having a basically tiny share. Between them, less than 10%. But recently, you've seen this trend actually changing, particularly from this red line here. So my question would be, can anyone guess what this red country or region might be? Or this? Okay, very good. Yeah, so people get that one. China, okay, has gone from obviously being dominant up until even the early 1800s to basically being nothing, 5%, that's barely anything of world GDP, to the sudden revival, which started more or less in the late 70s. Okay, you've seen this massive takeoff. So yeah, that's China. We're going to talk about China a lot in this module. Okay. What could the other country be? People find this one a bit harder to get usually.
Russia?
Yeah, not Russia. It's a good guess, but no, Russia would be. I don't know where Russia would be included there. It's just not. It's not big enough to warrant its own line. Okay, but let's just put this into perspective. If we went back to the time of Jesus, or even up until 1500, basically, this was by far the world's biggest economy. Well, by far, yeah, significant. And I guess it's interesting. I think if I was an England student, I'd get this one maybe. Okay, they have good food there.
India.
Very good. Yeah, India. Usually, see, people usually guess Mexico when I say that. Okay, okay, it's good spicy food. That'd be India. Yeah. So if you, I'm not going to take it off now, but if you want, under there you can see it. Okay. So obviously that only goes up to 2008. If you go, if we put this forward, we'd see that orange line going up quite quickly, not as quickly as China. This is a really important thing. Okay, when we say the rise of China. It's not really a rise of China. Probably better to call it the, you know, maybe a return to normal, okay, or a reversal almost. You know, not reversal, so a recurring trend, which is, you know, China and India used to be a huge part of world GDP. You know, you get to 1900, around World War I, they were basically, like I said, between them 10-15%, and now we're seeing this massive trend, okay, of China's and India's GDP massively increasing. So it's very important to take this historical context into account when we're looking at economies. Yes, the rise of China does seem amazing, but actually when you look back a bit further in history, you would have realized that actually China being a dominant economy is actually not that surprising. Okay? So these have been the two biggest growth success stories. Okay? You know, combined population of about 2.5 billion, and have actually for the first time seen economic growth. Haven't really said this yet, but I think now is probably a good time. So remember, I divided up macroeconomics into recessions. Basically, why? No, let's go back to the question. Okay, why do countries have recessions? Was one, or the business cycle, and why are some countries so much richer than others, and why are some countries so much richer than they were a few decades? So these are the two big questions in macroeconomics. Do you guys think we have good answers for any of these, either of these questions? I think there's, let's say, consensus. You know what I mean by consensus? Agreement amongst economists. You can probably tell by the way I'm asking these questions is that, although it's great that you're studying economics, because economists do tend to have a lot of respect in what their opinions are. When it comes to maybe the two biggest questions in economics, we really have no idea, in all honesty. Okay, we're going to talk about a few reasons, particularly for the right one today. But really, in about 2007, there was many politicians saying there is no such thing as the business cycle anymore. Boom and bust is gone. We're just going to keep growing at a steady rate. Okay, about 9 months later, what was the first thing of the financial crisis? The collapse of, I guess you were about 6 when this happened, so probably. House?
Yeah, right. Was wasn't right.
Yeah, it was that's the housing market causes, but the first kind of like the history books will be Lehman Brothers. Maybe you've heard of that.
Pardon?
Lehman Brothers, the first big investment bank that just collapsed. It was kind of like, you've heard of Goldman Sachs, maybe?
Yeah.
It's like if Goldman Sachs suddenly went out of business. It was a huge shock. Okay, so only 9 months after people were saying there's never going to be a recession again, you saw the biggest recession in history until now, and maybe up until 20, 30 years ago, there was majority of economists were saying India and China are doomed to being poor forever. China is never going to grow. It's going to stay at a GDP of about 1,000 or 2,000 per person, and it's just going to remain in poverty. Okay, and now the average person in China has about 10,000 GDP. So they've increased their GDP by 10 in about 20, 30 years. Okay, 30 years. So there is, unfortunately, kind of annoying to say, economists do get a lot of respect, maybe even more respect than they deserve, to be honest, within politics and public policy and stuff. At the same time, we're not very good at predicting what's going to happen or explaining it to the same extent. Okay? Now, there's still plenty, we've talked about some positive things, let's talk about some negative things. There's still plenty of what we would call disaster economies in the world. I'm sure the Venezuelans will fill us in on what's been going on in Venezuela recently. We will talk about that. I want to talk first more about Sierra Leone. Okay, I'll tell you why in a second. But does anyone know the country, Sierra Leone? It's in Africa, yeah. Very good. Sierra Leone, as you guys call it. So it's in West Africa. Just here, obviously, massive history of slavery and colonization going on there. So it's arguably the poorest country in the world. It's definitely in the top 5. Here's the bottom of the league table of countries. Okay, at the very bottom, Burkina Faso, but these other countries as well: Mozambique, Sierra Leone, South Sudan, quite a few in this area actually. Okay. Does anyone want to maybe guess what these numbers could be here? Okay, let's maybe start when we're about this one. This number here.
That's life expectancy, no?
Very good. That is exactly it. That's life expectancy. Okay, so life expectancy about 50, which really probably is not much higher than these guys. Okay, or maybe these guys. Okay, life expectancy around here would have been about 50 as well. So put it in perspective, the same life expectancy as England or Spain 250 years ago. Okay, so already a pretty shocking statistic there. What else do we have? Maybe guess this one. Okay. This number here, 1,500, 1,691. These different numbers.
GDP per capita.
Very good. Yeah, very good. GDP per capita. That's exactly it. Okay, GDP per capita. Does anyone know which country has the highest GDP per capita in the world?
Like Luxembourg, Switzerland.
Yeah, it's most people would say very good again. Luxembourg. Luxembourg has a GDP per capita of about 100,000. Okay, so 100 times richer than most of these countries here. Okay, pretty shocking, all right? And then we have this one's an interesting. I'm going to talk. There's a reason why I talk about this one. 9, 4.9, 8. Any ideas? I'll give you a clue. You would. How do I say this? You would be in this number now. I don't have to say it better.
Percentage of like, no.
It's not a percentage now. It's a hard one to get. That's the average years of schooling. Okay, so about 9 years in some countries, which once again is actually not relatively, it's still pretty low, but not obviously as such a difference as this. I think it's about 14, 15 in most Western European countries. Okay, so why have I got this? That's Sierra Leone. Okay, so it's great to talk about successes. Okay, and we're going to talk about managing the economy, but just be aware. I'm sure you are aware that there are still plenty of countries which are at the same time beautiful. That's me there with a very famous economist. I don't know if you can see, we're both drinking Guinness. Everyone's very popular Guinness in Ireland and West Africa. Weirdly.
I remember him.
What's that?
Amigo, ¿se acuerdas el de Luisito Comunica?
So yeah, I was there on a research with this university actually about a year and a half ago. Beautiful country, but just so poor. So incredibly poor you can't even imagine until you get there, really. So yeah, one of the unfortunate cases, so life expectancy, expected years, GDP. So we put that together to call this thing called the HDI rank, the Human Development Index. Okay, so these countries would score probably the lowest on this human development. So not just looking at GDP, but looking at other factors of the success of the economy, such as health and education. These countries would score, just score absolutely abysmal, in all honesty. So it is important to be aware that there are plenty of places in the world that are quite similar to what we saw before. Quite short, hard, unfortunately quite boring as well. There's not too much going on there. Dangerous, and arguably, as opposed to maybe the ones we saw before, where things were kind of staying the same, possibly getting worse as well. Maybe not Syria alone, but there are plenty of African countries, and maybe Haiti, for example, maybe some Central American countries that you can argue are actually getting worse. Venezuela obviously being an example of that, unfortunately. Okay, so here we go. So this is the reason I want to talk about education is I'm just trying to show you a few things that maybe a growth economist or someone who works in this area would study. Okay, here we have two interesting graphs. Don't worry if they look a bit confusing. What they basically do is have all the countries, that's like Japan, Romania, Cyprus, Tunisia, Iran, Venezuela. I think down here, unfortunately. I don't know if that is Venezuela. That seems a bit too low. But let me explain what it is. Okay, so you have conditional growth. So basically, how much these countries have grown in, I think it was about 20-year periods, and conditional years of schooling. Okay, so basically, trying to see if there's a relationship between how many years of schooling there is in a country on average and how fast that economy grows. What you kind of see is there is a bit of a pattern, but at the same time, there's also quite a lot of anomalies, ones that stand out. Can anyone maybe tell me why that might be the case? Why years of schooling is not that good a predictor of how fast a country grows? Think about all these. Think about, let's say, for example, Singapore and Taiwan. How would Singapore and Taiwan be different schooling when it comes to maybe, look at Venezuela or Peru or Bolivia or Jamaica? I think 1 year of schooling in Singapore is the exact same as 1 year of schooling in Peru. Yeah, almost definitely not. Okay, obviously your averaging in some schools will be different and stuff like that. But really, what you find is actually there's not much of a relationship here. What you do, interestingly, see a far better relationship, so far more closer fit, is these international tests that different countries do, called the PISA test. So basically something like, I think it's 10,000 students in every country, not every country, but most countries in the world, will do these tests, okay? And they'll get a score, an average score for that country. If you plot that score, as opposed to years of schooling, plot that score, okay, against growth rate, what you see is a far better pattern. And I'll be honest, that's what I've seen, okay? Traveling around. So before I was in Colombia, I was in Australia, working there as a professor, okay? And the big stark contrast, when you go from Melbourne, Australia to Medellin, Colombia, okay, and you see what the education systems are like, there's a massive difference. And I'll be honest, even within Europe, there's huge variation. Spain would not rank overly high on this compared to a country, let's say, like Denmark or Finland. Okay? So that's really what you find. Okay, this is what, this is just one, I just want to give you an idea, this is one of the things that growth economists will look at to try and explain why some countries have done so much better than others, okay, in the last 20, 30, 40 years. In fact, more interesting maybe, if you do it by region, you see a really, really good pattern here, a really good relationship. Asia, really high scores, grows really fast. Sub-Saharan Africa, really, really low scores, barely grows. Latin America is a little bit higher. Europe's around here. Okay, so this is one of the things that growth economists or lots of people who work in this field will look at. Obviously, maybe someone wants to tell me. What else besides education can maybe impact how fast or how well the economy does?
Life expectancy.
Yeah, definitely. If people are dying, they can't work. Life expectancy is good. But maybe, okay, someone from other countries, why would, What's some other differences you see maybe between, let's say, Spain and Latin America?
Oh, a lot.
Yeah. Where'd you start? Yeah. Okay. We're not going to talk all about this now, but like, there's education, right? You know, what are the roads like in Colombia and Venezuela?
Terrible infrastructure.
Awful
Pretty
infrastructure.
bumpy.
What's that?
Pretty bumpy.
Pretty bumpy, and have some good photos of going around cliffs and stuff like that. Okay. Obviously, it's not just the country. Like, at the end of the day, it's a far more mountainous region as well, so it's not.
Yeah.
Okay. There's lots of other factors. So some other ones we talk about is. Okay. So Europe. You know, Spain has neighbors, not the worst neighbors in the world, the French, okay, and the Portuguese. And is there? No, well, I guess the Italians are kind of there. Pretty good neighbors, okay? I know we could all complain about the French and the Italians all day for various reasons, but they're great, let's be honest. What happens if your neighbors are, let's say, in sub-Saharan Africa, and you're trying to do your economy quite well? You know, what could maybe the economy next door be doing?
Copying.
Copying's not a bad idea, but that's not the worst thing. I mean, there's a lot of copying between countries within Europe. I'm kind of saying more, you know, if your neighbor's having a full-on war beside you, it's quite hard, you know, for your economy to grow when the economy beside you is in war or has a massive black market or something like that. So there's not, okay, so we're going to talk about education, but I just talk about education because I think it's a particularly interesting one, is what I'm interested in. But do be aware when we look at growth, there's many, many different reasons and theories, and once again, not that much consensus on why some countries grow so much faster. Everyone knows education is important, but there's been lots of other theories, from who colonized you, if you're a colony, that's a big one, that's what a lot of people study, to language, to religion, okay? Lots of different factors there. Hopefully we'll talk about them a bit more throughout the semester. A big one that I thought maybe some of you guys might have said, okay, would be, here's a little clue. What's going on there?
Yield massacre.
Yeah, it is a bit of a massacre, but who are the guys wearing the clothes and who are the guys not wearing the clothes?
Oh, so the poverty gap.
Yeah.
Don't overthink it, just think, what's going on in this photo? What would we call that? What did Spain do when they first went to South America?
Oh,
Or I think I made a joke about it. Okay. And obviously,
Educated.
yeah, they educated everyone. Yeah. Very little education going on there. Okay. Obviously, I'm not just picking on the Spanish. Being from a country that was colonized for about 800 years, we're not the biggest fans of the British. Obviously, not really. I have a lot of British friends, obviously, but no, Britain did just as bad things within Africa and other countries. Okay. Portuguese, obviously. Never forget the Belgians or the French in Africa, actually. Okay, so you know what's going on there is really colonization, but what actually is really happening was, you know, why were they in the place in the first? You know, why were they there? What was the reason for going to South America? What were they trying to get? That was actually yeah, to India. So that's why. But then when they actually stopped, okay, why don't we stay here and take? What were they trying to take back? Cortez. What was he after? Gold, yeah, very good. Lots of gold, okay? So basically, what we kind of also argue within growth economics is the fact that the history of Latin America is actually quite different to the history of, let's say, North America or maybe even Australia, for that matter. From basically day one, this economy relied on what we call extraction. Everyone knows what I mean by extraction. Basically taking things, okay? You compare that to North America. People didn't really go over there. There wasn't really much stuff to take. Right? There wasn't that much gold or emeralds or diamonds or anything like that. So really, and the same for Australia, to be honest. So their history was much more, okay, we're going to go over here, we're going to start a new life. Okay? And that's basically been, I think, the biggest, you know, come on, that's it. Okay? Probably some of the biggest arguments, recent arguments, of why some countries have done so much better than others is this historical difference. Some countries were set up basically not being democratic and to basically just take as much and not really invest back into the country, as opposed to some countries, like again, Canada, United States, where there was basically colonization to kind of, actually not really colonization as such, but people actually from Europe moved out there and, you know, tried to start their own economies. Okay, so something that happened 500 years ago, okay, still has massive ramifications today. One way this definitely has big ramifications would be this. So I think someone did say the word inequality. Okay, does anyone want to guess which country has the highest, very top income inequality in the whole world? Any guesses? I'll give you a clue. It's one of these 5.
Can you repeat the question?
It's Brazil, isn't it?
Which country has the highest inequality in the world?
I think it's Brazil.
Yeah, most people say Brazil. It's not actually.
Brazil or Mexico.
They're okay. So you're kind of getting why I've put these 5 countries up, right? So actually, Colombia has the highest inequality in terms of income. Okay,
Wow, that's.
in the whole world. Yeah, obviously there could be other reasons for that,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't blame it purely on Pablo Escobar. To be honest. Yeah, there's other things going on there. The reason I picked those 5 countries, okay, was as you see, they're all in the top 10. Okay, top 8 even. Most unequal countries in the world. Okay, so Colombia, Brazil's 3rd, Mexico's 4th, Argentina's 6th. Okay, yeah, so Chile's quite low down as well. Okay, so you see this massive income inequality. The biggest talk, and I'll show you the book. I'd really highly recommend. Is there he is. The biggest book, okay, I'd highly recommend reading. Like I said, unfortunately, we're not going to talk about this too much in this module. So why is there such differences in income and countries and stuff like that? I'd really highly recommend the book Why Nations Fail.
I've read it.
Oh, who read it?
Regina, again.
Oh, Regina.
Yep.
Very good, Regina. And you can obviously lend it to all your friends then, right?
Sure. But
Yeah.
I haven't, I left a few chapters because I think it was very, very long.
It's a very big book, very big book. But that's really good you've read it. In fact, I haven't actually finished it myself, so you've done better than me.
Same.
Okay, so Why Nations Fail, really good book. So we're going to talk more about that. I just want to quickly finish with South America. I think, as I said, that's why I'm here. Student protests, lots of tear gas, as we say. So you see a lot of this going on. So according to the International Monetary Fund, Latin America was the world's slowest growing region again. Okay, I think that's happened for 2 or 3 years now. Some of that is due to Venezuela being so negative, but a lot of countries
I
are.
attended to one of those protests in Venezuela.
A student protest.
Yeah.
Was there lots of gas lacking molders or having
Yeah.
They're shooting rubber
It
bullets.
was pretty hectic.
in Caracas?
Yeah.
Wow. I must have been impressive, like intense, I'd say, because I never experienced tear gas, and then just one day in university, someone let one off. I think it might have been a student or something. And it really hits you, and you don't know where it's coming from. So you're like, which way do I run?
I was studying one day on school, and there was like a big manifestation in the highway, and all of the gas with the wind came to our school, and it was pretty hectic.
Oh god. Yeah, I've heard some. Well, I'd say actually the university I worked in Medellin probably has the highest rate of assassination for any university. Obviously that's died off a lot, but it was more the 80s and the 90s. Anyone who spoke out against the narcos or the paramilitaries. Okay?
What's your favorite Colombian food?
We'll talk about arepas at another time. Don't worry. Okay? Let's just.
Arepas? No,
Colombian.
man. I'm sorry.
I know. Well, the thing is, there's so many Venezuelans living in Medellin. They all start up arepas places. So yeah, it's my favorite Latin food. Let's
I
say.
don't like bollos.
We'll talk about that another time. Okay. But yeah, I like a lot of that food, and I know there's some good places. Okay, so just briefly, obviously, we're going to talk about Latin America a bit because we have some Latins in the class, and I've been there. It's a very interesting continent. In case you didn't know, lots of elections are coming up this year in these countries. Okay, but just finish on that point, I think, which is basically, if you have bad institutions, this is what we've really kind of learned as growth economists in the last years. It's what really kind of impacts. If you have massive inequality due to your history of, let's say, colonization, probably has a big impact on how your economy. That's not surprising, I guess. A big impact on how your economy is doing today. Okay, so we've got these elections coming up. Okay, We also have, so this book, Why Nations Fail. Okay, so this is a really big thing. Institutions are key. That's what this book, I'm sure Regina will tell you guys, is all about. Why do some countries have such good institutions? Switzerland. Why do some countries have such bad institutions? Okay, maybe the best example of this would be North Korea and South Korea. So what's this photo of? Watch it. Yeah.
How do you say it?
Just the light pollution.
Yeah.
Light pollution. Okay, and as you can see in North Korea, there's literally none, which I guess is good. And in South Korea, I'm joking here, but tons and tons of light. Okay? No. Do these countries speak different languages? No. Do they have different older history? Different cultures in the past? No. So why are they so different? Why is one basically has a GDP of about 2,000? One is South Korea is one of the most successful economies of the last 50 years, one of the richest countries in the world. How can you explain that difference? A lot of it falls back to this. Okay, there's the recent history of this country was unfortunately controlled by the Russians during communism. This country embraced democracy, not right away, but it did. Okay, and as such, this country's had phenomenal growth, and this country's stagnated. It got worse and worse. In fact, some people estimate because of COVID, things are getting really, really bad in North Korea. But no one knows really. It's very hard to say. Okay, so institutions are very important, and what we kind of basically say is that if you have inclusive institutions, you're going to have inclusive and strong economic growth. When you don't have institutions that include, what do you tend to see? Okay, you see situations where there's not much growth, there's a lot of inequality. Only the growth does tend to go to a very few percent of people. And then, perfect example, you have a bit of a Venezuela situation on your hands. Okay, lots of growth, but then it ends up imploding. Okay, happens all the time actually within countries. Will it happen in any of these countries in the next year or so? If you have to put your money on it, okay. If you have strong growth, strong democracy, strong institutions, you're less likely to end up in a really bad situation. For Latin America, Argentina, Mexico, and Chile, I know we can almost laugh at this, do actually have quite, though it's far from perfect. It's none of these countries are Switzerland, let's be honest, or even Spain, okay? But probably aren't going to implode. Who knows? Maybe in a few months' time we'll be wrong. These countries, Nicaragua, Honduras, Haiti, much worse. So please, I think we'll have a break now in a second. Do take that away. Institutions are important, but maybe even more important is your history. Depending on how your history was, how you were colonized, or what kind of democracy and institutions you've had in the past, really does tend to have a big determinant on how successful you are today. So say that. Yeah, just be clear. I'll quickly add. There's four more guys. We'll finish that in a sec for a break. Okay, so this is really what institutions are. Once again, don't worry if you don't get it completely. I'm not going to be testing you out really on institutions, but I just want to give you this is the biggest thing that's going on within growth economics fundamentally. The discussion of how important are institutions, how important it is that you have good law courts, a good police force, good capital markets for raising money, okay, just good markets in general, in determining your growth. Okay, this is really what everyone's talking about in growth economics. Unfortunately, we're not going to talk about it too much in this module, but I think it's important to know what's going on amongst academics in this field, okay? And more and more the evidence would be pointing towards this, okay? So doesn't matter how simple, used to these reasons are always climate, or your different cultures. But then they started seeing South Korea, North Korea, a good example. This is Nogales in Mexico. What makes this city interesting? Okay, I don't know if you can see, but there's a little kind of thing going down the middle. What could that be? Bit of a trick. There's Nogales, Mexico, but there's also Nogales.
It's different.
There's also Nogales, USA.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so here we have the USA. Here we have Mexico. And this is one of the biggest things they point out in this book, is basically the histories of this place aren't even too different. The cultures actually aren't that different. People have very similar DNA and ancestry. Okay, the weather's obviously exactly the same here as it is here. But at the same time, this place is about 10 times richer than this place. And Nogales is actually not a particularly poor place for Mexico. And Mexico is obviously not a particularly poor place for Latin America. So it gets a lot worse, if you keep going south. Why is this? Okay, institutions. That's what we're really talking about. Okay, having good institutions, having different histories as well. Okay, being on the right side of this border. Exactly the same for. Does anyone know where this might be?
Yeah, it's Berlin.
Yeah, Berlin once again. Different side of the wall, completely different living standards and economies after a period of time. You saw this massive, okay, change in how rich one side was compared to another. So immediately, okay, we solved it. You just have to have good institutions, you have to have good democracy, and you're going to be rich, right? Okay. Why might not be? What will be a counter argument to that? What's been the fastest growing in the world, the fastest growing economy in the world for the last 20 years? China. Okay. China does not have a very similar economic model or democracy compared to, let's say, the United States. At the same time, it's not just had a phenomenal 20 years, it's had a phenomenal 2020, given what's been going on. As you can see there, it's the only large economy that's going to grow in 2020 and going to have a really big recovery in 21, as opposed to, let's say, Spain, which saw 11% decrease in 2020. Okay, so it's maybe not as simple as we think. We know institutions are important, but then how do you explain China? Okay, so there's a lot of debate going on. Okay, so what I'm going to do is let you guys have a quick break, but I want you to go away thinking about this. What about Africa? In your opinion, from what you know, why is Africa so poor? Why can't it grow? Okay, come back, have a little. Okay, we'll have a quick discussion about Africa and then a few more things to cover. So, anyone have COVID yet?
I had it. I may have had it like last.
Yeah, you guys might have had it without realizing. So, my best Christmas present this year was COVID. Quite nice. Yeah, got it on the 25th of December.
Nice.
Along with the entire family. So, try not to get it. It's awful, to be honest. I guess if you're so young, you're probably okay. But, so that wasn't particularly nice. It's quite ironic. I think I was saying my sister lives in Milan and I live in Madrid, and we've managed to live there for basically a year without getting COVID. And then we come back to Dublin, which had like about 10 cases per day, and we get COVID. So the irony there was delicious. What was I gonna say? So obviously, probably will, I assume will almost definitely be in class. So it works, right? So you'll be here on Fridays. And so, for example, if we had the class on Monday, would you guys be here or would it be the other?
It's weird. We're a mix. There's people that has to be mandatory always here.
Oh yeah?
And then
Who's the mandatory always here people? Okay. What did you do wrong?
and then the rest of us are supposed to mix. But sometimes as there's people that rather stay at home, we basically do whatever we want.
Yeah.
Okay. That's obviously fine by me, to be honest, as long as, yeah, I don't know. As long as I don't get in trouble for that, it's fine. Okay, that's good. I was going to say a little bit of administration.
Usually the ones that we're here, we usually come almost every day.
Because it's quite a small, how big is your class in total?
32.
It's a bit smaller than my other one. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, it's, yeah, I heard, because Academy did a different system, so every day was
We don't talk
alternating.
about that.
It's not bad.
We don't do that.
How, because I heard we say English beef. The anger, you see the anger most of this club, what's it called? Barcelona, right? That's where there's the groups, right? There's the CEU group, the Academy group. That's what my second year's Academy group. But I guess you guys have never been to it, though.
Que se nota el beef en Teatro Barcelona. Porque tienes a los
The fighting up. But you guys are all turned 18 during COVID, so you've never been to a discotheque in your life? I love the word discotheque. It's such a funny word. Yeah. So obviously, maybe illegally been to them, which is fair enough. But yeah. See, I think it's a good point of time to say, life for everyone is pretty boring at the moment. So, really, I've taught this 3 times. Might get a bit boring for me. I do look for guys as, if we can have a bit of a laugh in these lectures, it makes a huge difference to, I think, everyone's mental health, including mine. I'm currently, I'll say this now again, currently doing a PhD basically on all that stuff we just looked at. Carlos to settle. So pretty busy with that as well, going a bit nuts. So it'd be good if we can just have a bit of fun, particularly on these Fridays when we're almost there for the weekend. Okay, so we're going to talk about a few things today. I want to go through this quite quickly, actually. So this part, so we've done growth. We've talked about growth and institutions in that area. This next bit, I want you to kind of keep in mind what we're doing is, why are we studying economics? Okay. One is to obviously try and work out why Sierra Leone is so poor. Is there anything we can do about it? But the vast majority of you, even the people who do economics, are not going to end up as economists. Okay? If you have a guess, what do you think the most likely career path is for people who study economics?
Entrepreneurship.
Men, definitely, obviously a lot. We're going to talk about yes, but unfortunately, at least in my course, where I did my undergraduate degree, sad news is that 90% of people end up as accountants. Okay? So yeah, and well, my dad's an accountant, so let's leave it there, I guess. Okay. So why the hell are you studying economics if there's no real reason? Okay, if you're never actually going to, I'm lucky enough, I'll be honest, and it is a great job to actually get to do economics on a day-to-day basis. 99% of people who study economics will probably never really do it again once they finish university, which is a bit sad. Okay, so keep that in your mind, for that's what the next part of this lecture is going to be about. Firstly, why can't Africa grow? Any general answers to that?
High levels of corruption.
High level corruption is definitely, probably, maybe the biggest reason. Okay, any other ones besides corruption?
You have people in absolute poverty and you can't really get out of it. So.
Yeah, say that to the South Koreans. They were in absolute poverty and now the richest country in the world, one of the richest. It's not quite as simple as that. Poverty doesn't help, obviously. Education and health tend to be very low during poverty. Okay, so here's my first one. Always be careful if you ask questions because they can lead you to answer with a certain way. Okay, so a better answer to why can't Africa grow would be, well, that's just not the case. Okay, there's actually plenty of stories of growth in Africa. See up here, I think I know. One of the fastest growing countries of the last 20 years has been Botswana. Relatively small country in Africa, but still has done phenomenally well. Up there with the likes of Hong Kong and China and other countries like that. Singapore, higher than Singapore. Okay. Obviously, we moved from successful countries to disaster. It's probably the only word to describe them. The majority of these are African countries, obviously. We've Venezuela, Nicaragua, Guyana here as well. But countries that have done very bad, the majority are in Africa. Okay, with a few exceptions. Okay, so by and large, Africa has not done very well, but at the same time, it hasn't been a complete disaster. There has been some success stories, Botswana being almost it. Okay, at the same time, going back a bit, once again, why history is always so important to understand when you're talking about economics, in my opinion, is actually, this is a graph of average growth. Okay, so Africa against the world for a long period, from about 1960 to the late 70s. Okay, Africa actually had quite a good growth rate, not too different to the world average. Okay, and given some of the disadvantages Africa is unfortunately cursed with, disease, okay, the history of slavery and colonization, it's not actually that negative. Okay, so that's the first way. Okay, and that's what the first part of what economics does. So it helps you to ask not the easy question, but the right question. Okay, and therefore give the right answer. The much better answer or much better question is, why has Africa maybe not grown very much since the 80s? Or why has some countries in Africa done very well, some done very bad? Once again, corruption, institutions, natural resources. You can see on the side. Okay. I'm going to go into that actually. Going just a little bit fast. Okay, so that's one. At the same time, this is why we've basically just been talking about lots of different countries in the world. Okay. So learning economics, not only will it make you better at asking questions and therefore getting the right answers, but it really helps you to understand what's going on in the world. Okay, so this was obviously the world's biggest news story before everyone had heard of Wuhan. Okay, what was this? What was this news story? You sit at the very back, it's hard to see.
Australian fire.
It wasn't the Australian one, so it was the Amazonian fires. Okay. So can anyone tell me why was there lots of fires in Amazon? It's weird, doesn't it? This story seems like it happened about 10 years ago because of COVID, but remember, it was quite a big thing. Okay. Any ideas why? Who could you maybe, if you had to blame one person for this, who would it be? Why did it happen as much as it did? Okay. Up until about, what was it, 3 months now? Up until 3 months ago, who could you basically blame for everything that was going on? Yeah, I think I heard the name.
Trump.
Ex-President Trump. Okay. So these fellas. So how can you blame Donald Trump for fires happening in a country?
Being the greatest economic president of all time.
Were you one of the Latin voters? That's surprisingly high amount of Latin voters who voted for Donald Trump. I can understand that. You don't want a socialist republic. Okay, we'll talk more. We're not going to talk about politics, but actually, this is quite interesting. This is economics. Economics really explains what's going on here. How did Donald Trump cause these fires? Okay. It's all to do probably with the biggest economic news story. I guess COVID's a health story. The economics thing that was going on, and it is still going on, was this. Okay. Donald Trump's trade war with China. Okay. So how does economics explain how a trade war with China causes fires in the Amazon? It's actually quite simple. It's one of these things you've never realized unless you have a good understanding of how the world economy, macroeconomics works. So what did you really see? This trade war started between the two countries. What's one of the biggest things that the USA and China trade? Anyone know what these are? One of these things no one knows, but are actually huge.
Soya beans, no?
Yeah, very good. Soybeans. Well done. Soybeans. Okay. Massive amount of trade from the USA to China for soybeans for various reasons. Basically, it's used to feed animals. Okay. And China needs a lot with a massively growing population. That got stopped because of the trade war. Okay, what did you see? China needs these soybeans to survive economically. You start running out of food, things get very bad, particularly in a communist country. Okay, what you see is they started to find new markets. By far, the two biggest markets were Brazil and Argentina. What do we see? A massive increase in demand for soybeans from these countries. If there's an increase in demand, what's going to happen to supply? Increase. How do you increase the supply of soybeans in a country like Brazil? You have to grow them. You have to grow more. What do you need to grow more? More. No, funding is good, but just think about the photo here. Just need more space. Just physically need more fertile land to grow this massive increase in demand for soybeans. Okay. So what you see, whereas a very quick way of increasing your agricultural output, if you're a country like Brazil, Argentina, is this thing called slash and burn farming. Okay, basically just burning down all the trees, then you have lots of fertile land to grow soybeans. Okay, and that's really, the reason why you saw these fires from NASA, which had happened before, but why you saw such an increase, okay, in this area here, was really, you could argue it's politics and all this stuff, but really it's an economic reason. China needed these soybeans, demand increases, supply increases. Okay, massive increase in supply. At the same time, fires you can see from space. Okay. As a second reason, I think it's really important to study economics. It really helps you understand what's going on in the world around you. Okay. So that's a very, very important point as well. Next one was and this is maybe in terms of your professional careers, the best reason to study economics. And as we'll see in a second, is economics really helps you to ask the question, or basically become very hyper rational. That's how we describe it. And what am I seeing? Does this make sense? Okay, or is there something else going on here? Is the fires in the Amazon because Bolsonaro wants to just mess with the rest of the world? A lot of people kind of thought that. Even I think if you go back, that's I believe that's Leonardo DiCaprio's Instagram. Was all, why are they burning the trees? If you study economics, understand the world, but maybe more importantly even, being able to understand why is this happening? Does this make sense, or is it actually an economic reason that actually explains what's going on? Okay. And there's two ways I believe you can describe this form of thinking. One is it's often called as corkscrew. Okay, a term invented by none other than Winston Churchill. Okay, creative ways of understanding problems. Okay, This is really a big gift, I believe, that if you study economics a lot, it does tend to give you. Preferably, I personally prefer this term, which is studying economics basically gives you a bullshit detector. Okay, if someone's trying to lie to you, trying to maybe trick you in some way, that economics brain that you've picked up from studying economics for 2, 3, 4 years, however many it is, okay, really helps you, okay, within your careers. Okay, that's why I have this next slide here. I think kind of what entrepreneurs was a good answer. Where do a lot of where do a lot of economists end up? Okay, the vast majority of people, the highest percentage after computer science. If you kind of got rid of tech companies, by far, the highest percentage of CEOs, the degree they study is economics. Why is that? Because you'd be able to think like this. Does this make sense, or is there something else going on here? What is actually the cause? Why are our sales down? Okay, why are we losing customers? Okay, that's basically the job of a CEO, is to get to the bottom of a problem. Okay, I don't know if you maybe saw this yourselves, but like I said, during COVID, I was back in Ireland with my family. My dad is the boss of a pretty big company there. Kind of listening into his calls. Basically what a boss does is you have to deal with everyone else's problems. The big problems rise up to you. If you have this economic mindset, the ability to get to the bottom of what really is causing this problem, that's how you become a good boss. And that's why so many people who study economics end up as the CEOs of the top countries in the world, the top companies in the world. Okay? Does anyone know who this is, by the way? No? That's the head of Inditex. Good example of someone who did that. Okay? So that's what economics makes you good at. So just one more rationale, because sometimes, I'm not going to lie, there are parts of this module that will be boring. We're going to be talking about some stuff that isn't overly interesting. I think it's always good to have a motivation. And I think a pretty good motivation is studying economics can really help you become a better problem solver and think really rationally to understand what's actually happening. Whether it be if you're running a business, okay, maybe you want to start your own company, even things like online trading, okay. So here we go. Here's the Wall Street bets, which everyone says. No one's made any money off this?
No.
Anyone lost any money on this? Okay. Well, I know a lot of people. So does anyone else know about the story? Any rough? Have you kind of heard but not really know what's been going on? So maybe one of you guys want to explain quickly to the rest of the class, or someone online if they want. They can explain what's going on.
If I'm correct, the GameStop. Well, can you hear me correctly?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay, so the GameStop trading crash was that many people from the Reddit app, many investors, the public, went against Wall Street because they decided to pump up the prices of the shares of GameStop, and so they kept buying and buying and buying and buying and buying until obviously the main investor firms or hedge funds, also started buying, and then they suddenly dropped the price by selling, and they made them lose millions.
Yeah, no, billions, more, hundreds of millions.
Yeah, more.
Yeah.
Also, that's not what happened, but it was a phenomenon called a short squeeze.
Yeah, short squeeze, which we're not going to go into today because short selling, I've tried to explain that to students before, and sometimes their heads explode. So I don't want to have to clean the walls or anything.
Well, it's easy to explain.
I think the most important part about this whole thing is that they were holding for a specific point.
Yeah, the short squeeze, that is important. But short selling, how do you explain to someone you sell something you don't own? It's a bit of a hard thing. It's easy to say, but to actually get your head around it, it's been quite tricky. Okay.
And then,
go
sorry.
ahead. Yeah.
Well, if I remember, right when I read it, then some traders stopped people buying because they said they prohibited that from people buying it, and then that's where the public went crazy because why doesn't Wall Street let me buy stuff? It's my right to buy stuff, and that's what I heard about that.
And that's when it really started making the news. Okay, so
Yeah.
I don't know if any of you guys have apps for investing. Yeah. What do you guys use?
No, the app that did that is Robin.
Robinhood, yeah. which is not very popular here. I guess eToro is the popular one, right?
No,
Yeah, it's awful, but people still use it. So Revolut is the one I use personally, and it's actually quite good. But yeah, I got this email last week. Sorry, you can no longer buy stock in GameStop or ANC Entertainment. The interesting thing about that is that there's all this finance, and that's very interesting. But why did this happen now? Once again, why now? And how can economics, you know, there has been some economists talking about why this was going to happen. Why now, at this particular time? Not necessarily even with these companies, but this was definitely going to happen. It was just a matter of time. So what changes has been happening that caused this to happen?
So
there's three big ones. Okay.
They want to screw up hedge funds?
There's always been anger against hedge funds. That's not new.
Well, it's not anger. It's people saw an opportunity to screw with them. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that opportunity, you could say, kind of came up from like the Biden's entering to the presidency of the USA.
Really? How would you link this?
I don't know. I just kind of made that up.
Yeah, there's a link there, but you can argue Trump. There is a link with the president of the USA, like almost everything. Okay, there's three big factors going on. This is what, yeah, if I can send you a podcast on this. It's very interesting. But basically, there's three things. One is a massive increase in the amount of people who are able to buy and sell stocks basically free. Okay, if you go to even 4 or 5 years ago, if you wanted to buy a stock like GameStop, you'd have to go to a broker, okay, which these apps are, to be honest, are brokerages, and it would cost you maybe $50 to buy one stock. Okay, obviously you could buy thousands, probably still, but still, it was not a cheap thing to do. You've seen this massive fall, basically fall in cost to, in this case, a Revolut, zero. Okay, to buy a stock now costs zero. At the same time, you have far more people. From you guys to all the Reddit guys to just hundreds of thousands, hundreds of millions, no, tens of millions of people who now have these apps who didn't. So suddenly you have a lot more players in the market. When you have more players in the market, that does tend to cause this trend going on. Same time you had COVID, which caused two things. One was people had way too much time on their hands, and particularly in the US here as well. Well, yeah, that's where maybe you can link in the Biden thing. A lot of money. There was a lot of money coming into people that they didn't have before due to these support programs by the President of the United States. All these three things together is probably what economists will say, and when they look back at it, is what caused this GameStop thing to happen. I think the most important thing, without doubt, is the fact you have independent players within this market. Okay, but there's other factors as well, which are all, you know, economic to some extent. So just one more example: if you study economics, or at least have a good understanding of what's going on in the world in economics, can maybe help you get to the bottom of how a share, like, I think some guy turned 20,000 into 4 million, okay, which is pretty good for a guy who sits on Reddit all day.
Yeah, but like to have 20,000 to invest in one single stock, you kind of already, like you could consider yourself a player in that market already. Like that's.
But he wouldn't have been a player. Yeah, it's true. It's true. But you know, what, I think this guy literally got a second mortgage on his house. And then, you know, in the end, would have that happened 10 years ago? Possibly not, but possibly. But you know, the fact is, was him, but there's plenty of other people in similar situations. Instead of one or two people doing this, you had thousands. And that's how you saw the share price go so crazy. We will talk about financial markets, but more towards the end of the module. Okay, that is obviously very interesting. Okay. Okay. So, yeah, we're going to talk about COVID now. We don't overly talk about COVID in this, so I do try and put something funny in before we talk about COVID, because it is fairly depressing. Okay, so this is the World Economic Growth Outlook, produced at the end of 2019 for 2020. Okay, pretty positive. Okay, and then what did you see? Okay, fellow come along, and things just went from bad to worse. I don't even know really what the latest data is, but you know, global economy was expected to shrink by 3%. Then that got to 6%. I don't actually know what the final, they don't really know yet what the final results for 2020. But yeah, probably the biggest, yeah, without doubt, the biggest global shrink in GDP in history has just happened. Just remember, like, I won't go back, but remember that line was just flat, right? For thousands of years, flat, flat, flat. The economy didn't really change up or down too much. Tiny bit up. Now you've seen this massive drop. So this has never happened before. So obviously, very interesting economic phenomenon that's been going on in the world at the moment. Probably more interesting from a studying point of view is how we responded to it. I think, as I said before, the rule book has gone out the window. Economic things have been happening that no one, even a year and a half ago, would have ever predicted. Okay, so we will talk about that quite a bit. That links to every student's favorite word. No, I'll come back to that. I have to send this. Where is it gone? Yeah, here we go. Okay, so what I want you guys to do for homework is basically exactly this. Okay. Oops. For next week, so I think you can guys probably get this done over the weekend. It's not too hard. Just basically pick a country. I kind of say it can't be Spain, just because if people do Spain, everyone does Spain. It could be obviously where you're from, but if you're from Spain, maybe just choose somewhere else. Basically, any country you want, country you have a connection with. So obviously Venezuela, Mexico, Colombia, whatever. You can feel free to write about them. Just something a bit different. Find some interesting facts about their economy, and then basically write how they've handled COVID and how you expect the COVID crisis to affect their economy in 2021 and going forward. Keep it, yeah. I do have to read I'm gonna have to read about 70 of these, so do keep it short as possible. Just really key points. So no, just for an example.
Can you put it again?
Yeah, what I'm gonna do, Teresa, is I'm gonna send it to you, these slides on WhatsApp, and you can send it on for it.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's how I do these things. WhatsApp, we'll use WhatsApp quite a bit this semester. Teresa, so just the example would be, so say what your name is. Often students say if they have a nickname or something. Do say where you're from. So if you're from Spain, if you want to say where in Spain as well, that's fine. Where in Colombia, where in Venezuela. So I picked Sierra Leone, and then I just quickly talk about Sierra Leone, how its economy was expected to do well. It has not done very well because of COVID. At the same time, compared to most economies, and quite a few economies in Africa, has actually handled COVID quite well, just because they have a history of dealing with Ebola. So kind of more used to having to do things like quarantine, for example. Kevin, you had a question?
Yeah, so it should be that long.
Literally, yeah, that long. Yeah, a few. Just the main week, where you're from, your name, just a bit about that. Just kind of want to get to know what you guys are interested in.
The picture of the monkey on.
You can put a picture of a monkey in if you want. Or any non-offensive photo. Okay. So that's the homework. Let me just go back. I think because it's a Friday, and I think the last thing anyone wants to talk about is how messed up the world's economy is. So I think, what I will say is, things have not gone very well, and what will 2021 look like? So you write that, and then we'll have a discussion on Monday about how you guys view things are going to go in the world economy in the next year or two. What are going to be some positives out of COVID, and what are going to be some lingering negatives, I guess. That'd be nice. Okay, guys, we'll finish it there. I guess in the future, most lectures will start. We'll start at 10, maybe finish. Maybe start a little bit after 10, finish about an hour and a half or whatever. Guys have a break. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you enjoy economics. I think most students say this is a really good module. I've heard in the past, so do enjoy it. And it does get hard at times, but if you work through, I think it seems like I have some pretty smart students in this class. I think we're going to be okay. Any questions or anything, ask me at the end. And I'll see you on Monday. Have a crazy weekend sitting inside.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
No worries. See you next week.
See you on Monday. Bye. Bye, thanks.
Bye, guys.